Hi. Hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. I guess for context, I'm kind of looking to write an article for our blog around providing around intelligent ERP, because I think it's an interesting trend, which I think if you're looking kind of future focusing, it's something that interests people. In context of what I'm trying to do, I kind of want to write a sort of an advice guide for any businesses that are kind of thinking about this area, particularly in kind of industries like manufacturing, distribution, food and drink, and automotive, which I think you have some experience of working in and understanding. I'm going to frame it in a kind of how it helps digital transformation in that type of way. So I guess when answering my questions, just kind of frame it as if you're kind of talking to a client or providing advice for how to go about it, and that would be probably most useful for me. Yeah. Okay. I mean, maybe the first question to start with is around. IDC call it intelligent ERP, and that's how they're framing it. I mean, from your point of view, what's your understanding of it, and how would you put it across, and how important do you think it is?
So I think in context of intelligent ERP, I think it's just one of what will become a whole new genre of intelligent enterprise applications. I think you can apply the same principles that we'll talk about with intelligent ERP to intelligent CRM, to intelligent marketing automation solutions, to intelligent finance, to intelligent HR, etc. So I don't think the real talking point specifically is about intelligent ERP as an individual application, but actually, the future of intelligent enterprise applications within the business. And I think that, if you look at the last 20, 30 years, we've largely used these large monolithic enterprise applications to automate a lot of business processes. And we've picked that low-hanging fruit, over those last 2 or 3 decades. So you walk into a manufacturing organisation, or in a bank, or in an insurance company, or in a retailer. A lot of the efficiencies that's been gained from ERP or from other applications like that have already been achieved. So we're on to this diminishing returns. It's really hard to make really big strides in efficiency improvements or other improvements within the business. But at the same time, the markets that these companies are serving, the manufacturers, the retailers, the service companies are serving, are changing dramatically. If you look at manufacturing, we've got very significant change in consumer trends. The loss of loyalty now. The fact that we can go online and compare different products from different sources instantly, and then with the rise of kind of global sophisticated logistics, we can get products sent from South America, from Eastern Europe, from China, almost as easily as we can from our home markets, etc. So the dynamics of the industries that we're serving are changing greatly, but the ability to respond to them using the traditional methods that we would have in businesses are becoming significantly mismatched. So I think the ERP is more about, or the intelligent ERP is more moving from this era of automation, which we've had over the last 2 to 3 decades, to one which I call optimization. And we talk about optimization in, you can read, the literature of ERP vendors, and they'll talk about optimization. But I think really in that context, it's really about advanced planning, not true optimization, because true optimization, is very difficult for us human beings to contend with. That complexity in optimization is a notoriously difficult problem. So this is where this whole genre of new technology, and I say new technology cautiously because we talk about things like artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has obviously been around for decades. It's been in the university labs for perhaps nigh on 4 decades, more than that. But actually, it's really coming to fruition now, because what makes AI possible is other technologies, things like big data. Big data needs, industrial Internet of Things and low-cost sensors, for instance. If you're creating that big data, you're in effect going to have a lot of data to store and a lot of transport of that data. So that relies on very high capacity internet networks, etc. If you've got all of that data, you need the computing power, to do something meaningful with it. The cost of that becomes prohibitive, so the whole emergence of the cloud computing paradigm makes that possible for businesses. So when you look at the emergence of all of those kind of technologies, then that is where we can now start to attack some of these complex optimization problems. And these are things in manufacturing, in the supply chain, etc. And we can talk about some of those examples if you want to. So for me, it's about, this intelligent ERP is really about the change in the technology landscape where all applications will start to become, augmented intelligent applications where we'll have intelligence embedded into them, providing, augmented intelligence to the operators. But actually that will then eventually, start to automate some of these some of these cognitive processes in decision making, etc., will become automated, and then I think there will end up being, very autonomous type applications within business. So I think it's a very significant change that we're embarking on, and this is really starting to, certainly in the manufacturing sector, give rise to what we call things like Industry 4.0 and smart factories, etc.
Okay, so let's maybe focus on the manufacturing sector initially. What kind of advice or tips would you give to? I know this is a difficult question because there's so many different levels of manufacturer, but I guess on the large business end, or if you've had any kind of experience working with companies yourself. What are kind of CIOs and CFOs kind of looking at, C-suite executives looking at, and what are they thinking about, and what should they be thinking about when it comes to what we've talked about when it comes to emerging enterprise technologies?
I think the absolute biggest tip there is to concentrate on the shop floor processes themselves. If you look at the anatomy of a manufacturer, in the broadest sense, you've got raw materials and components coming in one end, and then finished or semi-finished goods going out the other end. A lot of organisations, large and small, have invested a lot in technology, in enterprise applications, in all of the areas surrounding that. They're using ERP to manage the supply chain logistics, using ERP to manage the downstream distribution kind of logistics and that sort of thing. But when you look at the actual manufacturing process itself, from when a product goes into production on the shop floor to when the finished good or the semi-finished good leaves that production process, it's still incredibly surprising how much manual processes are relied on in those scenarios. So we go into businesses, or I go into businesses almost every week where, they're very quite sophisticated from a technology perspective. They've invested heavily over the years in technology, but then it seems to stop at the shop floor, the door to the shop floor. And when I go onto the shop floor, you've still got operators walking around with, and this is, not an exaggeration, with clipboards, with paper-based forms, and they're writing, process parameters down from machinery, or they're writing test results down from periodic checks that they're doing on the production process, for instance. That's incredibly inefficient, and it's not unlocking the potential of, we've got manufacturers that maybe get to, the term OEE, overall equipment effectiveness might be around 60-70%, and it's very hard. It's almost like a glass ceiling, to go above that, and it's largely because of these highly manual processes where we're not taking that information, that intelligence from the materials, from the production process, from the manufacturing processes, and using that intelligence to improve the process dynamically in real time. They'll rely on these Six Sigma projects where, they will spend 3 months, dissecting a particular part of a process or a particular problem and coming up with a solution. That doesn't work in today's real-time business. That needs to be done in real time by using these advanced technologies in the shop floor within the production process. We know, because what the points we talked about earlier about the changes in the manufacturing industry, that companies, very simply, they've got to manufacture things, faster, better, cheaper. It's that simple. And the only way that you're really going to get very significant gains as a manufacturer is looking at the manufacturing process itself. And manufacturers will think about automation in terms of packaging machinery, filling machinery, automated production machinery. But you can automate bad and inefficient processes. It's about taking those manufacturing processes and using intelligence from them, using information from them to better control them and optimize them in real time. And that's what we call this manufacturing process optimization thing. But that has to happen on the shop floor with the production processes. So I think that's a top tip is, as a manufacturer, you've got to focus on the manufacturing part of your business, not everything else that fits around it.
Sure. I mean, I guess food and drink is some of that applies. But I mean, do you have anything specific to that kind of industry, kind of the food and beverage business?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are many examples. I mean, you can look at, for instance, the issues around, fill volumes. That's one example where you may have variability in a process, and there are strict rules in certain markets about net content control. If you go out and buy a product and it says it's 500 grams or 750 millilitres in that particular product, there are rules which means you can't go and buy a product and it's only got 600 millilitres in it, etc. So because of the variability in the manufacturing process, what a lot of food and beverage companies will do, for example, is they will deliberately overfill, so that if they have that variability, they're not going below these, in Europe they call T1 and 2T violations. They're not going under those levels. But then that remains on the other side. It means that you're giving away a lot of product. Some products, might be fairly cheap, but if you're looking in terms of, we work with, one of the largest spirit manufacturers, for instance, up in Scotland. And if you imagine that kind of scenario in whiskey or other kind of premium products, that giveaway can amount to millions and millions of dollars every year. So it's inefficient to use those kind of blunt tactics to solve those kind of process problems. Obviously, in food and beverage, we also have things around, food safety and traceability. We've all seen the kind of, the recent scandals around the horse meat scandals and that sort of thing, and other concerns about, the validity of food and traceability and the food to forking and that sort of thing. And that obviously applies right through the production process. And if you've got inefficient systems to be able to manage that, i.e. very manual systems or paper-based systems or whatever, then they become very costly, from a manpower perspective, and are prone to errors. And, if you then look on the flip side of what happens when those mistakes happen in today's 24/7, highly media-connected worlds that we live in, then, those issues that were perhaps localised previously now can, hit the Facebook headlines, and, the corporate brand is irrecoverably damaged. So yeah, there are many, many examples where, whether it's from a safety perspective in food and beverage, whether it's giveaway, whether it's underfills, whether it's, product quality or whatever, we've got to address them.
And what kind of, just a general business question, what kind of problems do you foresee businesses happening that kind of stay still or keep with the status quo, or don't really think about what we've been talking about?
Well, I think if you look at the impact of competition these days, we have this, even if you take in the UK for instance, this whole point of view of like the low cost supermarkets and that sort of thing, and it used to be something that we didn't desirably do, going to a low-cost supermarket. But now you can go into an Aldi and a Lidl or whatever and see Jags and Range Rovers in the car park. That thrift has become kind of trendy. And so this puts an immense amount of price pressure on manufacturers. And so like I say, you can sum it right down to they've got to make things faster, cheaper, and better. And if they don't, consumers, I call them the promiscuous consumer now, in that we don't have that brand loyalty anymore. You go back a few years ago or a couple of decades ago, and people would be heavily reliant on brands. If they bought that particular brand of tea or coffee or bread or whatever, they would tend to stick with that. But that is not the case now. If they have a bad experience in a particular retailer or with a particular product, they'll just quite simply go and choose another one, of equal quality but at a lower price or something like that. So I think the risks involved now of not addressing those challenges the impact on the business wouldn't necessarily mean that the business wouldn't grow or the business wouldn't perform better, but the risk is that the business could become so marginalised that they just become unsurvivable, in the future economy.
Sure. And when it comes to the enterprise applications that we're talking about, how important is this when it comes to, I guess, the wider digital business transformation that businesses may be trying to go through or wanting to go through?
Well, I think that the whole digital transformation or business transformation using digital isn't limited to particular areas of the business. I don't see how it will be successful if you just look at particular areas of the business. I think you need to look at the business holistically as a whole, and then you put the applications in, or the capabilities in, that allow you to achieve those objectives. So, for instance, technology arguably has very little value. If you look at the example with the iPhone, you can strip the iPhone down to its constituent parts and it's probably worth a few dollars. But I'm still happy to go out and spend $500-600 on an iPhone because it's the capability that it gives me, which is where the value is created. And I think the same has got to be achieved in digital transformation, is that we go out and procure capabilities, not applications. We procure capabilities that enable us to do the sort of things that we want to do in the business with our global transformation objectives or whatever. There isn't an enterprise application, a silver bullet, which you can just deploy and then all of a sudden it will transform your business. That's just folly if businesses go down that belief or that route. It's how they apply those solutions, how they apply those technologies within the business, which is whether they will be truly transformative or not. You could end up with a very smart factory and a very highly transformed digital business, but if they don't have the business model innovation, or they don't have the product innovation to match the market needs or whatever, then it's just going to be a very expensive waste of time, or a very very expensive pursuit that's not going to really deliver any difference. So you can't look at it in isolation of, right, well, for us to survive or to thrive, we've got to go through digital transformation. No, you don't. That's a part of what you'd need to try and achieve as a business.
Sure. Great. And in your day-to-day work, I guess you have a lot of conversations with people on the C-level for manufacturers and general business. I mean, you may have already kind of gone through some of these examples, but just maybe using case studies of particular businesses and real-life examples. You don't have to name names, but what have they been asking you, and how have you advised them to solve their problems if they've had one?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of the engagements that we work with are on projects which are what I mentioned earlier, where businesses are really going through this realization that they need to have this digital transformation, for want of a better phrase, within the actual shop floor, within the production processes. And so, we were working actively at the moment with, some major food and beverage brands, for instance, some major packaging manufacturing brands, where, almost summing up what we talked about, they realise that they've got to significantly optimise the efficiency of their manufacturing operations. And, certain ERP modules that, you might have, one of the largest confectionery manufacturers as one of the biggest SAP customers, for instance, they can't achieve what they want to achieve on the shop floor within the production environment with the SAP modules, because SAP is just too complicated, it's too complex for the operators. So, they're looking, for instance, at working with Infinity QS to have an integrated part of where the Infinity QS solution integrates with SAP, so they can, really optimise that manufacturing process in real time and provide a level of capabilities that the operators now need to do what they're required of them. And on that CXO kind of point, what we are seeing is, I guess, putting it in inverted commas, or air quotes, but the younger kind of CXO that are starting to get into senior positions within these large manufacturing organisations are absolutely much more receptive and even, clear about what technology can do for their businesses. And so that in itself is driving quite a big change in these organisations. You perhaps go back to previous kind of, CXO level people that had a history in traditional manufacturing methods and what have you, maybe don't see the opportunity. But these fresh breed of senior managers and even operators, are very skilled IT people now. They can even just in their own personal lives, with their mobile, log on and do something with their personal banking or see what their mates are doing across the other side of the world on Facebook and things. But yet they come into the manufacturing environment and they just don't have any visibility of what's going on within the production process. So that's driving, I think, these levels of changes within a lot of clients. So yeah, we've got active projects with a wide variety of different manufacturers, some very large-scale global confectionery manufacturers that are absolutely embarking on this, industry transformation or this manufacturing transformation project, and they recognise that they've got to do it. Obviously, a lot of the details of those projects are, confidential under non-disclosure agreement, so we couldn't really talk about them specifically. But yeah, that's what we're seeing.
Sure. I mean, that's quite interesting about, I guess, a younger breed of C-level executive coming through. I mean, you mentioned some of them, but maybe what kind of sort of topic areas is more front of mind? Is it kind of areas like the cloud, which they're often, or Industry 4.0, which they're often talking about, more in conversations? And what are they? I guess if they're talking about new things, what are they not talking about anymore then, compared to maybe an older generation?
I think that the overriding kind of topic tends to be around intelligence and analytics and that kind of discussion, rather than previously it was probably about process management, about processes, about how we can make the particular supply chain process a little bit more efficient. How can we automate some of the manual processes in invoice generation or invoice checking and that sort of thing. Whereas the conversation, I think, really now moves towards how can we utilise this incredibly valuable asset that we have in the business, which is information, and in its various forms, whether it's data, whether it's intelligence or whatever, they're all, fundamentals of the same thing, which is information. And, when that's information that the business has inside its four walls or by integrated external information into that. So that whole kind of information and analytics piece and intelligence, I think, is now where the discussion is, rather than just around process management and business process automation and that sort of thing that it was perhaps over the last couple of decades.
Yeah, and I guess talking about it from a sort of a more global perspective in terms of the news, such as I guess I just mentioned like maybe Brexit or maybe Trump with the tariffs. How can technology potentially mitigate like big, massive changes like that that happen that manufacturers will probably feel the effects of?
Well, I think there's two parts to that. One is, on the Brexit front, there's the obvious thing there of, issues around potential like labour availability and that sort of thing. Therefore, obviously, in a manufacturing environment, how can we, remove or reduce our reliance on what we would normally be able to fill the gap with, low cost workforce, etc. That is a challenge. But I think you can take a step back and see these, whole things like you say with the Trump and the trade and Brexit and all these sort of things. They're all signatures of just a more real-time economic global environment that we live in today, that we operate in as businesses. And whilst after Brexit, after the Trump trade issues or whatever, there will be other things. There will be other things that manifest very quickly and impact on businesses very quickly. So for me, it's about what I mentioned earlier about creating this environment, a digital environment or a smart environment within the manufacturing organisation that can respond to changes in their markets almost in real time, if not near time. You can't afford to go off and do a 2-year project on, how do we respond to Brexit or how do we respond to, particular trade or competition issues, whatever. These are things that you've got to be able to respond to and react to in near time, in real time. We know that with the rise of, e-commerce and the internet, that, competition can spring up almost overnight and start to take business away from you. You only need, your competitors to run certain promotions or something like that. That can have a major impact on your business. And, if you can't respond quickly, you end up with excess inventory, or if you cut back on that and things go the other way, then you can't produce fast enough and you miss the market opportunities. So it's about the speed of business that I think has to be a lot quicker, and businesses have to be a lot more responsive to the external environment and to how these things change. And I think therefore that goes back to this whole optimization problem and complexity, in that we've got the systems in place that we can change very, very quickly. What
do you think the barriers are, maybe for C-level executives to kind of put? I mean, it can't run smoothly. They must have kind of issues with kind of integrating the type of technology you're talking about. So I guess, in your conversations, what are the main issues that companies may have, and should they deal with those issues?
They are tricky ones. I think one of the big problems that we kind of see, I guess, is the talent. When certainly on larger organisations, they're like any business. They're going to compete for talent. If you get senior management, they will be attracted towards businesses that are more innovative, that are more putting a lot more investment into these things that we talk about, which makes almost a catch-22 situation. Is how do you attract that talent if you've yet to embark on these transformation projects? So talent is a big issue, and you almost kind of sense that there's this. Right phrase, but almost like a rabbit in the headlights from a senior management perspective. In like, when do they pull the trigger? When do they go on these transformation projects? Do they go now? Do they wait? Do they, where do they even start? Because a lot of these businesses have come up in the mindset. A lot of the people within the culture are, traditional type, the they've built their experience on making things. So actually now going into a business that is an information business, if you say to a manufacturer or even in the information business, and they'll obviously majority turn around and say, well, we're in manufacturing, we make physical things. But you could argue that actually, that they're in the information game, and the better they can compete with information, the better they can weaponize information from a market perspective or a competitive perspective. And that doesn't mean understanding your market and how to create marketing campaigns for certain target audiences, etc. That weaponization of that information, might mean understanding exactly how a particular, packaging machine or a filling machine or a mixing machine is comparing to another one in another part of the factory, and how we can alter, the characteristics of one, or predict some downtime, or predict some maintenance that needs to happen, so that we don't have these kind of, costs in the business that don't need to be there. And that's what we mean about competing on information, or competing as analytics, as the old HBR article was, or whatever. That applies to manufacturers just as in the same way as it would to a social media company.
Sure. And I guess if I want to talk a little bit about maybe product development and how potentially information in real time can help with that. And is it maybe a good way to kind of frame it to businesses who are a bit unsure about kind of investing?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier about you can't see digital transformation or things like that in isolation, or as a thing in and of themselves. They've got to be coupled with product innovation or service innovation or whatever. Otherwise, they just become expensive artifacts that don't really achieve anything, because you just haven't got. You might be making the products that you're making absolutely much more efficiently, but you're making products that the markets don't want anymore. So it's about it is about innovating on products, but it's innovating on business models as well, and having that technology underpinning, or that digital transformation might enable you to have different business models than you could have achieved previously. So, for instance, for example, I guess the famous one would be the GE one with the aero engines, where the old business of selling engines. I think there was that new story recently, for instance, with Rolls-Royce, where they make something like £1.5 million loss per aero engine, but that's almost designed because they make the money from the power by the hour type model and the servicing, etc. But if you don't have all of the digital data and the sensor data and everything like that coming from those products, then that is not a business model that you can or an industry that you can participate in that sense. So it is about using those technology underpinnings to help drive innovation in products or services, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. One might not be possible without the other, and vice versa.
Great. And I have one last question. It's kind of more focused on the cloud, because obviously a lot of the technology we've been talking about kind of it needs the cloud to be somewhere or used. So in terms of how they're approaching the cloud, what are the biggest kind of topics or kind of topic areas that seem to come up when you've been talking to C-level execs?
I think that there's still the single biggest issue with cloud adoption is this whole kind of question and uncertainty around security, risk, and that sort of thing. It just feels alien not having our data, whether it's production data or ERP data or whatever, not having that in our secure environment within our business feels difficult, feels alien. It's almost like the elephant in the room whenever you have these discussions around cloud, etc. But I absolutely believe passionately that cloud will just be the de facto computing model. The actual concept of people housing their own infrastructure, etc., will almost be as bizarre as suggesting, a few decades ago or whatever, that people still generate their own electricity, or manufacturers still generate their own electricity. That's not the business that they're in. These businesses are not technology businesses. They're not going to make money by technology itself, by creating systems or creating applications or having a data center or whatever. They're really going to, as I said before, how they weaponize that data or information and use it in their markets. Leave that technology expertise to people who make a living out of delivering technology as a utility, like AWS, like Google, like Azure, that sort of thing. So I think that is absolutely still the biggest barrier to cloud, but I think it's in 10, perhaps 20 years or whatever, it will almost become an anachronistic discussion where it's like, did we ever really do that? But I think that, IT will effectively just become, will just consume these cloud resources. And if you look at things like AI and what have you, AI is only successful with things like machine learning and deep learning, what have you, on massive data sets. And if you've got those massive data sets, you need to store massive amounts of data. You need the computing power, but you don't need it all the time. You don't need these, computing power to be available literally every minute of every day. It's only when you particularly want to run these perhaps like simulation environments or modelling routines or whatever. Well, why not just pay as you use it rather than pay for these very expensive resources that, as we used to do years ago in IT? And I come from an IT background. I was in IT management. I was a developer, and that was what you did. You had a rack of servers, and you had a server room, and you had a data center, and that sort of thing. But I think that concept will become absolutely alien in the next few years, and cloud computing just will become the de facto way that we consume computing resources.
Sure. And I mean, that kind of relates back to a new generation of C-level executives kind of thinking more on those lines, and not thinking, not worrying, I guess, as much as kind of maybe the security implications, but still thinking about it, but maybe because they're more sure about what cloud technologies can offer. So I mean, I kind of that's kind of an interesting angle, I guess, potentially to kind of focus on for this the article that I'm thinking about. In that, I find that an interesting point. So obviously,
it's like these people, they will pull out their iPhone and they'll use all of these apps and everything that they have on their iPhone without really a thought in the world about the infrastructure behind that. It's just capability on demand, and so I think this whole notion of having these data centers and servers and stuff like that internally will be alien to these people. It's just like this plug and play. Well, why do we need all of that? Why don't we just have that available to us? And as that generation kind of change happens, I absolutely do think that people will just it will just be this cloud first mentality, and I see that every day. I've had conversations, and this is no exaggeration, with large global manufacturers where one day we've talked about cloud, and the answer has been they are absolutely just not cloud ready. They're not considering cloud. They don't agree with it. There's concerns around risk and availability, and then I've had a call 6 months later where the senior, the CIO or even the chief supply chain officer or something like that has turned around to me and said, "Do you know what? We've got a bit of a problem. We're now a cloud first business, and we've got all of these systems running, in our own data centers and everything." That's in the space of 6 months. And you made that interesting point around security. I do think when we talk about the likes of AWS and Azure and Google and what have you, their business is about cloud computing. Your data will be far more secure in their resources than being on some server under somebody's desk in a factory somewhere. It's just not comparable.
Sure. And I get one final question. I mean, as you said, there's still maybe issues in kind of cutting through that kind of mentality. So do you think, like, when it comes to people who are kind of less sure about the cloud, what do you see happening to them? Will they get kind of moved out, or will they, or will the kind of the financial or kind of corporate demands just kind of force them to change?
I think a bit of both, but I think also it'll be a question of economics. In the sense of if you want to really play in that AI, or not play in the AI space, but if you want to capitalise on this whole area around, for instance, things like AI, machine learning, that sort of thing, the economics are just going to make it impossible. You're just not going to get signed off, internally. Building a $2 billion data center as a food manufacturer so that we can do AI modelling and simulation on our production processes. It's just a non-starter. The economics are not going to allow it. So it's almost like, you're going to have to start exploring those cloud options by default, and so, I think, that question simply of economics will answer that question a lot, I think. Either that or the alternative is, you don't utilise them solutions. You talked about intelligent ERP, and if you was to deploy those intelligent ERP solutions internally, not sort of cloud-based, it would be very difficult, I think, to deliver those AI type machine learning capabilities because limited resources.
Sure. Okay. That's I think that's the questions I have, and I've got an idea of what I want to write. Do you have anything else that you want to share before I get off the phone?
No, I think we've talked a lot. I do think obviously we started the conversation off on this intelligent ERP, and I think this whole. I kind of don't like the definition of Industry 4.0, where it's almost like this amalgamation of cyber physical systems and what have you. For me, the definition I prefer of Industry 4.0 is, if Industry 3.0 was about automation, then Industry 4.0 is about optimization. And that, I think, is a point that can be really underestimated by, what we actually mean by optimization. Even if you just imagine a simple, problem where we've got, thousands of different inputs, thousands of different possibilities, and all of those things are changing almost, in real time, the human brain just goes into meltdown. It can't figure out what the best configuration is. Whereas with these sophisticated machine learning algorithms, that sort of thing, it's just easy to come up with optimized solutions. And so we see it in we're starting to see it in so many different areas. So for me, and I don't actually like the term Industry 4.0 because it kind of implies that there is, you do something in an old version and then you migrate to a new version, but it's not. It's a continuum. It's a steady line. But I do think that if like Industry 2.0 was electrification, or Industry 1.0 was industrialization or whatever, and Industry 3.0 was automation, because we automated an awful lot of processes in the last few decades. You wouldn't see manufacturers now in the food and beverage industry, making things manually or filling things manually. It's all automated, but you can automate bad and inefficient processes. So for me, Industry 4.0 really is about optimization and using these new tools, technologies and methods that we've got to make optimization truly possible. So that, I guess, is my kind of closing remark.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for speaking to me, and really useful insight there.
All right, brilliant, no problem. Any questions, come to you after this, feel free to let me know, or go through Christian and Nick or whatever. But I'm more happy to speak to you again.
I mean, I'll have
thanks everybody.
I'll have articles kind of that I need to write like after this. So I guess you'll be a good point of call for me to kind of refer to if you have any kind of talking points. So I'll do that in the future.
So if you've got any questions, just ping them over to me and I can liaise with Jason and we can answer any follow-up questions that you need, or sort of expand on any of the themes that we've discussed here.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, great.
Brilliant. Thanks, Assessor. Thanks, Jason. That was really interesting. Brilliant.
No problem. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.